Greetings, Star Wars fans, whether you're a Bothan spy, a Corellian mercenary, or maybe you're a Falleen crime lord. My name is John Edward Lee, and I'm here with another episode of Universe Expanding Books and Toys, that 90s series. The 90s, my favorite era of Star Wars. This is a big one. This one only needs one episode because the sheer amount of stuff that they brought out around it was insane. I am, of course, talking about Shadows of the Empire, a wonderful book, but much, much, much more than that. In fact, as good as that book is, which was written by Steve Perry, which is an amazing story that takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which is a year in the timeline, but it was so much more. This is the real key to everything. This book, The Secrets of Shadows of the Empire. This was a book that outlined the multimedia mega series that was Shadows of the Empire. See, what they were doing was testing the waters to see if people would still be interested in new Star Wars stories. They were gearing up to do the special edition and then ultimately the prequels. But Star Wars, there wasn't a lot that came out between 1985 and about 1991, when the expanded universe started proper. Some people considered Star Wars dead in the water. The only people getting into it were people who read books, comics, played video games, which is a large amount of people. But could you get more people into it? Well, of course they did. The book was a big success, as was the video game, and to a lesser degree, the soundtrack and the comic book series. Of course, this was a multimedia event just to see if they could do everything without actually making a movie, and it was a huge success. They released so much stuff. I mean, this book is basically about, all the art that they did, the different vehicles that they designed, lots of really, really interesting stuff, even outlines for the comic books themselves. Now, I mentioned a soundtrack, which they did. Even though there was no movie, they made a soundtrack. Which is actually pretty good. Joel McNeely is the composer for this. Of course, not John Williams, although John Williams' music is represented in it. Some of it ended up in the video game, but really not too much. It was almost a standalone album. The video game, Shadows of the Empire, came out with the launch of the Nintendo 64 and was a huge success. It followed the Dark Forces Jedi Knight kind of style of first-person shooter surrounding Dash Rendar, who was the big, big new character from that. And of course, they released a series of figures as well. So there's Dash Rendar, the Corellian mercenary, who basically his role in the series is just to be a replacement for Han, just to be that cool shooter, adventurous guy, unlike Luke, who's just trying to be a Jedi in his own thing. Of course, they released a lot of figures for it. Prince Xizor, also the other huge character from this, who is a crime lord for Black Sun, who now has a much bigger role in the new canon and the old canon. At one point, Leia gets her Bausch outfit, and Chewbacca must disguise himself as the bounty hunter Snuva so they could do some spying. And of course, she keeps that outfit and uses it in Return of the Jedi. Now, another big focus in it was Boba Fett. Boba Fett had Han Solo and Carbonite. The series is almost about Han Solo being in Carbonite and the struggles around getting him back in the rebellion or getting him to Jabba the Hutt, which of course ultimately happened. There's also a pack with Darth Vader and Xizor. Xizor was a rival to Darth Vader. They were almost equal in the Emperor's eyes, and they constantly trying to outdo each other. And then of course they had Luke and an Imperial, what do they call it? An Imperial Guard disguise. Doesn't look like any Imperial Guard I've seen before, but he is red, and that's kind of close. And another big feature of that was Jabba's Swoop Gang, who was playable in the video game, or not, there was a swoop level in the video game, as well as in the comic book, there's a lot of the swoop stuff. Boba Fett has one. Years later, they did bring out a more modern version of Xizor and Leia. This is actually in a crazy scene in the book. Can it be a scene if it's in a book? I guess so. Xizor, and that's how you pronounce the name, I think that book says it, has this ability to produce pheromones and can control people. And basically, he starts seducing Princess Leia. And of course she isn't about it at all, but starts to, the pheromones aren't working on her, and she almost gives over to it. Luckily, Chewbacca was lying in the wings to save her and keep her from making a really, really big mistake. Another thing they released in that original Shadows of the Empire's line was Boba Fett Slave One, which is the first modern Boba Fett Slave One starfighter. The only thing in this series I don't have is Dash Render's Outrider, a YT-2400, which is very much like it's smaller version of the Millennium Falcon in the same series. No presence of that in the new canon, except for the special edition added a scene in Mos Eisley where you can see it flying around, but it's not the Outrider because it's not been written in. There is a YT-2400 in Rebels. So the ship design has been used a couple times. Besides the Kenner stuff, Galoob got in on the action with some Micro Machines. Now, this is the only one I have. I know there's 4 of these. There's some Action Fleet stuff. I actually just ordered the Virago, which is Shizor's ship, which is a really cool 4-winged ship. It's almost like if General Grievous was a ship. But that should be coming to me shortly, but I didn't want to wait on doing this video. I wanted to go ahead and get into it. And of course, at the same time, they released stuff for the very awesome West End Games role-playing game, which of course tells you how to play in the world of Shadows of the Empire for that. Now, the book sort of focuses on Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewbacca, and the droids, and Darth Vader and Shizor, and the power struggles there. The video game, which has the same basic story, mostly focuses on what Dash Rendar is doing at the time. So he has his own missions on Ord Mantell, battling IG-88, who was also in that pack with Boba Fett. He also had, like I said, there's a swoop level. So it was really focused on him. The comic book, which did follow the same story, you can see the cover is similar, it has all the players from the book, but it was much, much more focused on what Boba Fett was doing at the time. So all 3 entities sort of made up the overall story. Of course, Luke battles the Swoop Gang. Leia and Chewie go undercover. Luke gets captured and must escape. And ultimately the end of the series. There's that Virago ship. Doesn't it look kind of General Grievous-y? I think so. The comic books didn't end there. These 2 double packs came with comic books in them. I have extras just for my comic book collection. One of these involves the Slave One versus IG-2000, IG-88 ship. Now they also released some compilations of stuff that were in magazines, like the Jabba tape, which is about the Swoop Gang, the Jabba Swoop Gang, and then Shadow Stalker, who is a character named Jix, who shows up in the comic books. He wasn't in the game or the book, but he is a direct agent for Darth Vader, and just had bigger presence in the book itself. It didn't end there. It didn't end there at all. They made a sequel series called Evolution, which follows Guri, who was a robot, or I guess you would call her an android, who was Shizor's bodyguard and closest confidant. Of course, the original Rebel Gang's in there. A member of the Falleen who is coming to avenge Shizor. Spoiler alert, Shizor doesn't make it through Shadows of the Empire. And then the final conflict between Guri and her. The other comic book stuff that they did was a pop-up comic book, which is again about Boba Fett battling IG-88. A very cool book. I've not seen too many pop-up comic books. This one's pretty cool. Even the panels pop up. Very cool book. I really like that a lot. Shadows of the Empire has stood the test of time, but now, currently in the Marvel series, it's being replaced slowly by the new Marvel series that takes place in that same time period. Currently, the War of the Bounty Hunters series is about halfway done, and it does take elements from Shadows of the Empire. Of course, it has the Bounty Hunters, it has people fighting over Han, the Falleen and Black Sun show up in it. There's power struggles between Luke and Darth Vader, because that book takes place after Empire Strikes Back, so they're struggling with their father-son new dynamic between them. So that is Shadows of the Empire. They put a lot of stuff out there, and like I said, it continues to be popular. It's always a book that they try to keep in print, and I think they're just going to keep up with it, bringing parts of it into shows, things like that. I almost expected to see Shizor as the main bad guy at the end of Solo. They went a different route, which I'm happy about too, but it could have easily been Shizor. The Fallen have a presence in Clone Wars, as well as the comic books, and it also introduces, the comic books now have Crimson Dawn from Solo, who is the criminal organization, which is their rival. So they're still using stuff from it. The only other thing that I want to let people know about as far as Shadows of the Empire is it was almost the title of this movie, The Force Awakens. I don't know who decided, yeah, let's just use a title that we've used before for a really popular series, just forget it ever happened. Bad decision. The Force Awakens is a much better title. In fact, I think it's my favorite title of the sequel trilogy. That's all I have for you on Shadows of the Empire. I will be continuing with the 90s series with some stuff in my next video. But again, I implore you to, if you like this, to share, like, subscribe especially. I want to get a base of fans who are into this stuff, not just the comics, not just the books, not just the video games or the toys, but all of it that takes place outside of the movies. Thank you so much. Again, my name is John Edward Lee, and remember that the Force will be with you always.